I don't remember any event which I said to myself, I want to be an artist. I got a place at an art school in 1957, and that really started me off to get really interested in art. But it wasn't until after I left that things really happened. My father thought that being an artist was akin to being a ballet dancer. It was a thing which was rather, as he would say then, a queer thing to do. Of course, being an artist actually means you can divert your angst or whatever it is into other fields, like making sculpture or painting or writing poetry or whatever. And that's the good thing about being an artist. When my father turned about 65, he started to paint pictures. And this was a man who said those things about me all those years ago, and then suddenly he wanted to express himself. Paradox. Some of my work, there's a playfulness about it. I say that without pretension. I know it's a strange thing to say, playfulness. And there is a sort of element of it being a game. But I do like sculpture which has a certain wit to it. When one looks at, for instance, primitive carvings in churches or elsewhere, there is a sort of humour about it. And some of that humour, I think, is quite intentional. When one looks at gargoyles and that, there is an intentional thing there about it trying to be funny, but there's also a very serious intent there. They are not generally meant to be funny. Wit, on the other hand, is a much more modern invention where you're trying to have a wry humour about something. I think experimenting with materials is a most important part of creating another way of expressing yourself. And I think that's the thing that some artists have, that they're pretty useless at anything else except expressing themselves. Well, I don't know about the thought process of making a sculpture. I mean, normally it's very practical at first. If you're talking about the ecclesiastical work, then of course you get commissioned to do that, and then you have to go to the church, you have to look at the place and get what you can from it. I'm not the sort of artist that sits down for hours in front of, whatever it is and expects to be inspired. I sort of take a cursory glance and get from it as much in that small time as I can, and then I go back and work on it. The secular stuff is made mainly of found objects, so that's a much easier proposition. The church stuff, I have to research the wood, search out for the wood, and it's a much longer process as well. So I have tried all sorts of things and tried to make what I make a meaningful object rather than just pure abstract. I thought that driftwood, or material found on the beach, which was an easy way to collect, and rather a pleasant way to collect that sort of material, would be fine, and I started to develop a way of integrating this driftwood, etc., and other found objects, not just driftwood, into sculpture. So that's the way that came about, partly through other artists' influences, and also the fact that when you're making sculpture from found objects, there is the sense that you meet it halfway anyway, so one is not starting from scratch. It's not like a blank piece of paper in front of you. You've actually got something there to work on already. When you walk into the church, walking from the porch under the aisle, and then suddenly you walk into the nave with this beautiful Romanesque nave, and then you lift your eyes, and then suddenly you have this focus, and that's what the sculpture is about. It's about focus. People go into that building to offer prayers up and thoughts to an image. And that image they have to feel comfortable with. It has to fit both within the building and within their thoughts. It has to be a devotional object rather than just an architectural set piece. Of course it can be a theatrical event as well, and often big pieces of sculpture and painting and all sorts of things in churches are theatrical events. One has to exaggerate things so they get over. You have to over-egg them so that they get over. But beyond that, people have to see into them something that the object can give them back. It's no good having objects in churches which are just an outline, a coloured outline, representing. I mean, we know that the objects themselves have no inner life except an artistic life. We know they're not. We know the saints or Jesus or God does not reside in the object. But the point about art is to bring that out to the spectator, especially art in churches. Because after all, art in churches is it's not didactic in that sense. There is a certain amount of storytelling, but it has to give out something, and that's the difference. Southwell Minster is a great Romanesque church, so I thought, of course, it would be better to incorporate elements in its decorative qualities of what was in the minster, the cabling, the zigzags, so to make a harmonious whole of the sculpture with the church. That is obviously part of making the piece of sculpture and integrating it with the building. But of course they didn't just want that, they wanted something which was a genuine centre of focus, which people could relate to. I mean, it was, of course, always a very beautiful building, but by putting that Christus there, I think that it has established it as a building to do with Christ. Before, when there was nothing there, just a bare wall at the top, you walked into the church, and I've often said this, if a Martian suddenly landed outside and came into the church, before the Christus he would have found a very bare building. But now the Christus is there. There isn't any doubt that that building has a function. And so in that sense, it's improved the church. You're delighted that people like them. But what is more interesting is, in churches, is the fact that they pray in front of them. That, in a sense, goes a lot further than people just liking what you've made, because they have to see something in it which urges them to prayer, to want to look at this object, find something in it, and offer it something like a prayer. So that is a very strange experience for me as an artist, because then one feels very alienated from the object, because it's as if you've made it. I suppose the nearest thing you can point at is like having a baby. You bring it into the world, and then years later it just disappears out into the world, and when you confront your child again, it's a different person. And that's what I think happens with some of the sculpture I make for churches. I mean, I know, for instance, a lot of the sculpture I've made for churches will be there perhaps for 200 or 300 years after I'm dead. I don't know whether that's a comfort. I don't know what to say about that, really. I really don't know whether that's a comfort. After all, I'll be dead, you know. I know it's not just about me. I suppose that if there is anything to be gleaned from it, it may be that. It may be that idea that the sculptures are around, in a semi-public place anyway. In what words would I sum my career up? I think that it's not over yet, is what I should say. But I do remember Murray Irving, who was the Dean of Southwell, saying to me that before he died, that he regretted some things, and one of them was he wished he'd have drunk more wine. And I think probably that's my epitaph. Let's be serious. Sorry. Just edit that out. Go on. Only when you say so.